Vayikra. This, you know the middle book of the Torah as Leviticus because you live in an English-speaking world. But the book in Hebrew is known as Vayikra from those first words, and he called, Vayikra. This book goes into the details about the offerings on the altar. They remember where we are in this timeline. They've just completed the tabernacle, and now they've got to understand how this is going to be used. So by defining the tasks and the responsibility of the Levitical family of priests, this book also defines the responsibilities of the Jewish people who are known as the nation of priests as a whole. And the remarkable thing is then to understand this name of this book, Vayikra, and he called, because it's God's calling to Israel. Leviticus, Vayikra is the middle book of the Torah. It's God calling. But more than that, it's God's calling for Israel. He's calling to Israel, but he's revealing the calling for Israel. And it sets the pattern for how Israel is to function as a nation of priests whose responsibility is to call on God on behalf of herself and on behalf of all the nations of the world. This is incredibly important to understand the calling of God's people. All of Leviticus is about the relationship of God to the people that he formed. The book defines how the covenant relationship will actually function, the nuts and bolts of it. What struck me this week was recognizing that to be in covenant requires something very important. It requires communication. If you're in covenant with someone and you never communicate with them, then your covenant isn't real. Covenant requires communication. And the tabernacle and the altar were the center of that communication between God and Israel. And what's the other name for the tabernacle? They call it Ochel Moed, right? The tent of meeting. Meeting is relationship. And meeting requires closeness and communication. And of course, back in the days of the Forest Service, it also required donuts whenever I was in a meeting. But those obviously are not important because they're not in Leviticus. Leviticus lays the foundation of these meetings that are defined in the text. It lays the tone of those meetings, how they're supposed to be. And it also establishes the rhythm of those meetings. And we're going to talk more about that in a bit. But first, I want to share with you something that stood out to me this year. As I looked at the linkage between the Torah reading the first 5 chapters of Leviticus and then read that Isaiah portion that you've just heard, Isaiah 43, 21 to 28. What I saw this year was a record of broken communication. Isaiah is telling us something very important, and his words are absolutely drenched in what can be termed the pathos of God, to borrow a concept from Abraham Joshua Heschel, the pathos of God, the passion and absolute longing of God for the covenantal love, the chesed of his people, which he laid out in this book of Leviticus. To see what I mean, we need to drop the Leviticus label and call it what the book calls itself, Vayikra, and he called. There have only been a few times that this particular word, Vayikra, and he called, has been used to this point in the Torah. And each one has been an incredibly important moment. It says, God called to Moses another time. When was that? Well, that was to prepare the Israelites to receive the 10 Commandments. That was a Vayikra. Another place, Vayikra. And God called to Moses, what? To come to the top of the mountain and enter the cloud to begin to receive the Torah. The use of this word is associated with revelation. Vayikra, and he called. And after that comes revelation. Thus, here at the very beginning of this book, God, Vayikra, he calls to Moses to receive the revelation of the priestly commission on earth. Vayikra is an especially important and intimate communication between God and man. In all instances I have just spoken of, it is initiated by the divine. It was God calling, Vayikra, and he called, the he being God. But here in Isaiah, we come to see that God has an expectation of us. What did you just hear read? The people I formed for myself so that they may declare my praise. Verse 22, yet you have not called on me, Jacob. You have been weary of me, Israel. Amzo yatzarti li tehilati yisparo. The people I have formed for myself, that they may yisparu, maybe recount. That's actually an interesting word. The word comes from the Hebrew word sefer, which means to count. We call that a Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah scroll, because every letter is counted and accounted for by Sopharim. In modern Hebrew, this word sefer, actually also has the sense of a story, a recounting, a telling. The people I formed for myself, that they might give an accounting of my praise, is what this phrase might say. Tehilati, we use this word for psalms, Tehillim. They have having the sense of praise music, musical prayer. God says here that he formed a people for himself in order that they might stand as a witness in the world declaring his praise. In fact, a few verses earlier in this same chapter, Isaiah says it plainly in verse 10. You are my witnesses, he says, my servant whom I have chosen. Can't get much more clearly than that. We're to be witnesses to him. The Jewish people were formed by God to be his servants, to serve as witnesses in the world to God's mighty deeds and truth, and to declare this, Yesparu, this story, by word and by writing and by song and by action. Tell the story of God. But then in this part of Isaiah, God is actually chastising his specially formed people. And the great condemnation derived from the pathos of God says this, Lo oti karati, Yaakov. You have not called on me, Jacob. You have not called on me. You've become weary of me, Israel. The JPS Tanakh chooses to translate this as, you have not worshipped me, Jacob, that you should be weary of me, Israel. Either way, the message is clear. God is afflicted because Jacob has not called on him. God expects Vayikra to be a two-way street. He called to Moses, Vayikra, in Revelation. He revealed to Moses. And Moses transmitted that to us, and we are expected then to do what? To call on him in worship. Here in this part of Isaiah, God pours out his heartfelt longing for the two-way communication to be restored, to be together once again. In the next few verses, you see the links in the first few chapters of the book of Vayikra. Verse 23, you have not brought me the sheep of the Olah Tamid. As you read through these first chapters of Leviticus, you're going to see all of these things. Olah Tamid, you're going to see all these sort of things. The twice daily offering, both morning and evening. It says, you have not honored me with your zevachecha, the things like zevach shalamim, peace offerings, goodwill offerings that honor God's work in our lives. He says, I have not burdened you with mincha. That's the grain offering. You'll read about that in the first few chapters of Leviticus, the mincha offering. He says, I haven't burdened you with the grain offering that's supposed to accompany everything you bring to my altar. I haven't wearied you with incense, the sacred incense offering that symbolically represented all of the prayers brought into or directed towards the temple, rising before the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies, carried aloft by Aaron in his sacred priestly duties. And remember what Solomon said? I think we talked about this last week. Solomon said in his prayers that God heard and honored if anyone, native born or stranger from the nations, will direct their prayers towards this place where we turn when we say the Shema. Towards this place, they will be heard in your heavenly abode. And in 1 Kings chapter 9, God said, yep, I hear and accept exactly what you said. That's how significant this is. Not just some strange priestly ritual in an obscure tent in the wilderness or the temple in Jerusalem, but rather the point of interface between God and mankind. At least that part of mankind that is moved enough in their heart to turn toward that sacred place, meaning to turn their heart to God. Yes? Vayikra, and call on him. So what has God said here through Isaiah? I'll paraphrase. I've called to you, but you have not called to me. You lost interest. You've not been fulfilling your responsibilities to me. Neither your duties among Israel, nor your duties among the nations. You see, when the channels of communication between God and the people he formed to declare, to narrate his story, when those are disrupted, all the world finds itself in spotty, broken communication with God. I said a moment ago, I want to talk about the foundations, the tone, and the rhythms of that communication. I want to do that because these things have never changed. Read the book of Leviticus, read the Torah. It tells you when, these morning prayers and morning offerings and evening offerings and all of these things. They've never changed. God is the same as he was then, as he will be in the future. The rhythm has not changed. So we must understand then, those same things are accessible to us today. We don't have a temple, we don't have an altar, but the rhythm, the foundation, and the tone of that relationship is available to us today. The foundation for this whole thing is the altar, commanded to be a wooden frame clad in bronze with a suspended bronze grate. That inner area, when they traveled, was to be set down and then filled with soil first. So it was soil on which the fire was to be kindled. It was to be kindled on that altar, and the animals that were offered were to be consumed by fire on that. It was located in the courtyard facing the entrance to the tent, to the tabernacle. It is the key communication link between God and Israel. It has implications for individual communication with God. An individual might bring an individual offering on it. But it also has community-wide communication implications, because many of the offerings that were brought on behalf of the entire community. And it also has implications for the entire world, for the nations of the world, because some of those offerings happened at Sukkot. And there were bulls made for each and every nation on that altar. All this. Israel initiates the conversation, whether under the auspices of Aaron's community responsibility or under the auspices of the priestly duty for individuals, he has for individuals, or for interceding on behalf of all mankind. This is what the altar is about. Leviticus will, for the next several chapters, define what is to happen on the altars, and there'll be two primary words used, korban and zevach. Korban, or in plural, korbanot. Remember, the whole purpose of building the tabernacle was that so God would dwell among his children or within them. He wants to be near to them. He wants them to know how to come near to him. Therefore, the word for offering, korban, means to draw near. It's not like a pagan sacrifice, a bloody, horrible sacrifice. It's a korban. It means to draw near. The second verse of Vayikra introduces something quite important. Leviticus 1:2. Speak to Bnei Israel and tell them, when any one of you brings an offering to Adonai, you may present your offering of livestock from the herd or from the flock. The key term in this sentence are the following. Adam ki yakariv mekem korban la Adonai. Yakariv usually translates as bring, and korban is usually translated as offering. But actually they share the exact same Hebrew root, a three-letter word, root. Kuf resh beit. Come near, bring near, draw near, approach is what that word means. So korban, while the name of a thing called an offering, is differentiated from the word for sacrifice because it actually means drawing near offering. So the sentence has the implication of saying, when a person among you draws near, a draw near offering is actually how that could be translated. Doubling of the idea of drawing near emphasizes a truth about the God of the universe. He wants us to draw near to him. And let's remember how we got to this point. How did we get to the point where we're being told, a chosen people is being told to build an altar and a mobile tent for God in the middle of the wilderness? Well, you got to go all the way back to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve sinned and were kicked out of Gan Eden, which began our separation from him, our exile. And with that sin, death entered the world. It began something that I refer to as the cosmic balance, life for life. Things die that others may live. Plays out in the natural world in predation and carnivory. But humans eating animals is actually a biological matter. What about the spiritual underpinnings? All creatures share in the life which has its only source in God himself. You often hear people refer to Earth as the living planet. Well, the only reason it lives is because it got its life from God. So there's a cosmic balance at play here. A life from God is lost that another life from God may continue. More to the spiritual point, Genesis 3:21 tells us that skins were used to cover the newly noticed nakedness of Adam and Eve. If I could have found another way to alliterate that, I would have. Skins were used. Nakedness is our sinful nature. Animals had to be killed and their skins taken in order to cover that. A life from God is lost so that the sins of Adam and Eve might be covered. That's more than just eating. That's a spiritual underpinning. Ultimately, this leads to the understanding which will be revealed in a later chapter of Leviticus, chapter 17, verse 11. For the life of the creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your lives. For it is the blood that makes atonement because of the life in it. This animal life is often referred to among some Jewish thinkers as the animal nefesh, the animal soul. the same word that is used for our nephesh. But the animal nephesh is different from the human nephesh, which is made in the image of God. So, I always caution whenever I start talking about this, I'm not saying that animals and man are the same. I'm just saying that they both have a nephesh, a living part. Even still, because their nephesh is also sourced in God. All life comes from God. The Apostle Peter is credited with writing a prayer which is in every single siddur in the world. It's called Nishmat Kol Chai, and it goes in part like this. The soul of every living being shall bless your name. Hashem our God, the Spirit of all flesh, shall always glorify and exalt your remembrance, our King. Peter here speaks of the connection of all living things to the creator of the universe. He should know, right? He walked with Yeshua for 3.5 years. Peter here has expanded Isaiah to say that not only will the people declare God's greatness, but so will all things that have life declare God's greatness. The beginning verses of Vayikra tell us that if a man makes an offering from the herd or the flock, it shall be without blemish. He shall offer it at the door of the tent of meeting, that it may be accepted before the Lord. He shall press his hand on the head of the olah. What does it say? That it may be accepted for him to make atonement on his behalf. The life in the blood, the pressing of the hands. The physically perfect animal gives out its nephesh on the altar, that the atonement may be made on behalf of the one drawing near. This speaks to a very spiritual process. The Torah tells us that when Moses made these offerings, fire came down from heaven and consumed them on the altar. Jewish tradition tells us that the flames appeared in the form of a lion, which pounced down from heaven and consumed the offerings. The animal nephesh returning to its source in this fiery lion. Therefore, the idea of an animal is used as a substitute for fallen human beings is entirely a spiritual process. The picture is intended to imply that the offerer drawing near to God is symbolically offering up his lower animal nature on the altar, getting rid of the impediment that impedes us. Once consumed now, his animal nature consumed substitutionally on that altar, it's supposed to be able to elevate him to a higher spiritual state. But we know from texts like Hebrews, right, that these animal offerings were not sufficient to elevate the human neshama, or soul, to a higher spiritual level. They function well on behalf of our flesh, but they have to be given over and over and over again and can never accomplish a change in the neshama. They had to be done over and over again. An offerer might gradually gain a higher understanding, but offerings could never elevate the neshama sufficiently. Only Yeshua could accomplish that by offering his own righteous neshama, so that we, sharing in that great event, could actually be spiritually uplifted, so that our neshama could actually be transformed. But only if we willingly participate in his offering on our behalf with all our heart and soul. It isn't something you can just come to casually. It has to be internalized, what he did. And that is the foundation of communication with God, the connection of the altar of our heart with God. An offerer drawing near to God such that his neshama is elevated to a higher spiritual plane of existence. Now the temple is gone. And as Isaiah spoke, we have no excuse for our weariness of communicating with God. He hasn't burdened us for 2,000 years with a zebach shelamim, a peace offering. He hasn't burdened us with an olat tamin, a continual burnt offering, or a mincha, a meal offering, nor with the preparing and burning of incense. Yet he still expects us to call to him, to declare his praises. How is that done? Well, it's here in our worship services. It's here in the rhythm of your week, where you come here every Shabbat and you join in unity. And we say this liturgy that was developed alongside the offerings. We come to our gatherings. We're going to come to an appointed time. We're going to come to the week of unleavened bread, the Passover. And we're going to gather together. And we're going to unify ourselves before him. Listen, in the years after the destruction of the Second Temple, the sages had to redirect the faith in the unchanging God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It had been centered on the temple, and now the temple was gone. So they had to rebrand it, redirect it. In the Talmud, Berachot 26b tells us that the sages declared two things: that the patriarchs established the time of prayer, morning, afternoon, and evening. And it says this. I'll read it for you. However, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said that the prayers were instituted based on the daily offering. See that? This is what they said. The prayers were instituted based on the daily offering sacrificed in the Holy Temple, and the prayers parallel the offering in terms of both time and characteristics. That's what the Siddur is all about. This book that Jews have carried for thousands of years now, that have kept us in connection with God, is an exact parallel to the service at the temple, both in terms of time and characteristics. You see, both are true. God gave the times of the daily offerings. He emphasized times that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob established as times of prayer. Here in Vayikra, he gave the types and characteristics of the prayers, of the offerings. Isaiah just gave us some of them. Therefore, the prayers that we do out of the Siddur carry with them the same foundation, the same tone, and the same rhythm of communications that happened at that holy place in Jerusalem, day in and day out. Our prayers are the direct continuation of that sacred communication with God. That's what our service is here. When you come in and join in the service, and when we go through these things, the Mi Chamocha, the Shema, the Ve'ahavta, the Amidah, all of these are all elements of that service. And as I reminded my class today, what was that service patterned after? The heavenly Jerusalem. Moses was commanded to do everything after the pattern in heaven. So when we're doing this service, we're actually mimicking the pattern in heaven, which is going on today. You know, the sages didn't have to innovate too much to change Judaism from temple-centered to heart-centered, because the priests and the Levites had a long-standing tradition of accompanying the physical offerings with the offerings of their lips. By the time of the destruction of the temple, the foundational pattern and rhythm of the prayers were firmly established, even to the point of being spoken simultaneously in communities out in the diaspora and as things were going on at the temple. Communities scattered all across the globe were at the same time saying the same prayers that were being offered up in the courtyards of the temple. So once again, our precious Tzaddik Shimon Bar Yonah. What do I mean by that? Well, that's Peter. Shimon Bar Yonah, right? He was also known as Peter. He was known as a tzaddik. There's Jewish traditions that say that he was a tzaddik and a leader of the exiled Sanhedrin in Babylon. So our precious tzaddik, Shimon Bar Yonah, was able to also lead that nascent Messianic Judaism in the direction of a decentralized faith of the heart. I read this a lot, but it's because it has such deep importance to us. He wrote his letters to the Jews of the diaspora, saying in 1 Peter chapter 2, 1 through 7, "So get rid of all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all lashon hara." First thing off the bat, get rid of that. What did you have to do when you went to the temple? You had to wash in a mikveh, right? You had to be prepared to go in and make the offering. Well, this is how you do that these days. You get rid of all deceit, hypocrisy, and envy. Get it out of your lives. Prepare yourself. Be ready to give an offering. As newborn babes, long for pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow towards salvation. You see, he's talking about a process here, isn't he? Growing towards salvation. Now that you have tasted that the Lord is good, as you've come to him, a living stone, rejected by men, but chosen by God and precious, you also, as living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, a holy priesthood. You hear the link to Leviticus? To offer up what? Spiritual sacrifices, acceptable to God through Messiah Yeshua. For it says in Scripture, "Behold, I lay in Zion a stone, a chosen, precious cornerstone. Whoever trusts in him will never be put to shame." Now the value is for you who keep trusting, but for those who do not trust, the stone which the builders rejected, the one has become the chief cornerstone. Let us repeat that part again. As living stones, you are being built up as a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Messiah Yeshua. Leviticus told us that when someone was supposed to bring an offering, they were supposed to press their hands on it and transfer themselves to that offering so it would be acceptable on their behalf. That's what we have to do as we approach worship and prayer. We have to do what Peter just said. Get rid of all malice, envy, lashon hara, division, all of that stuff that makes you spiritually unfit to be in the presence of God, and then press in to the prayers. Press in to the worship. We can't just sit back and go along with it by rote memorization. We have to press in because that's our spiritual offering. Our prayers in these services are our spiritual offering. But they're not our only spiritual offerings. Our spiritual offerings are also those things we do in community for others. When we help someone in need, that's a spiritual offering. Press yourself into it. When we provide comfort for someone going through a difficult time, that's your spiritual offering. Press your hands into it. Transfer, that's you. All of you put into that. Peter is calling us to make amends for what God said to us through Isaiah. Yet you have not called on me. You have not brought me the sheep of your burnt offerings and so forth. Peter's calling for us. We don't have sheep of burnt offerings. We don't have incense anymore. But we have all these things that I just talked about. That's what he's calling on us to do, so that we call on God. Remember that Hosea also begged us in chapter 14, verse 3, take words with you and return to Adonai. Say to him, take away all iniquity and accept what is good, so we may repay with offerings of our lips. That's what our worship is supposed to be about. Offerings of our lips. So avail yourself of all the opportunities to pray. Pray at the set times. Pray in the morning, pray in the afternoon, pray in the evening. Don't let these appointments slip by without visiting God, without calling to God. if you feel so moved, avail yourself. If you're a man, come to my men's prayer on Tuesday. If you're a woman, come to women's prayer on Tuesday morning, if you can, if it's possible. Because those are happening at the set times. These prayers, this worship that we do, these are ways that we call to him. Because it's clear from Isaiah that God is expecting us to call to him. Amen.